Imagine you just received $100,000, a life-changing sum of money. Now imagine that the single decision you make in the next 60 seconds could either multiply that wealth or quietly destroy it over the next decade. The worst part? Everyone you trust is going to give you the exact wrong advice, and it's going to sound perfectly reasonable. What I'm about to tell you goes against everything you've been taught, but the math doesn't lie. Stay with me, because this could be the difference between retiring comfortably and working until you're 70. Whenever you find yourself receiving an unexpected windfall, perhaps a $100,000 bonus from work, a family inheritance, or money from liquidating a small business, you're instantly confronted with an agonizing, paralyzing decision. Should you deploy all that capital right now, immediately, in a single large lump sum, or should you gradually invest it throughout the next 12 months in smaller monthly portions, utilizing a technique called dollar cost averaging? This precise moment of paralysis represents the exact point where logical mathematics surrenders to primitive fear. The guidance you'll encounter from every sincere financial expert, internet discussion board, and personal finance publication will be nearly universal in agreement. Dollar cost averaging, abbreviated as DCA, represents the more cautious, more intelligent option. They'll insist it eliminates the emotional danger, shields you from committing funds immediately before a market collapse, and constitutes the responsible course of action. This guidance gets repeated with such frequency that it's transformed into unquestioned truth, a soothing catchphrase recited by the financially worried. However, I'm here to reveal that this represents one of the most mathematically hazardous pieces of conventional wisdom in personal finance. My name is Mary, and I dedicate an excessive amount of time examining investment data that demonstrates how common wisdom frequently amounts to nothing more than common laziness. If you're someone who finds yourself frozen by the anxiety of investing at an inopportune moment, make certain you hit that subscribe button, because today I'm going to present you with the compelling historical evidence that demonstrates how lump sum investing, abbreviated as LSI, outperforms dollar cost averaging approximately 70% of the time. I'm going to reveal the illusory sense of safety that DCA provides you, and I'll clarify why your greatest adversary isn't market volatility, it's the opportunity cost of time itself. Let's examine the fundamental weakness of the DCA philosophy. The explanation for why we embrace dollar cost averaging is entirely psychological in nature. It's constructed to shield our self-image, not to protect our wealth. We dread the emotional anguish of committing $100,000 today only to witness the market plummet by 10% the following day. We desire the absolute certainty of knowing that we didn't purchase at the market's highest point. DCA functions like a financial comfort object. It guarantees that you'll make purchases at certain peak values, but you'll simultaneously make purchases at certain valley lows, thereby averaging your cost basis. However, this emotional reassurance arrives at a tremendous calculated expense, the abandonment of compounding growth. When you select DCA as your approach, you're deliberately maintaining a substantial portion of your capital, potentially $90,000 from that initial $100,000, remaining inactive in cash holdings or a minimal interest savings account. You're in a waiting pattern, and each individual day that capital remains waiting, it's being eroded by the single force no investor can overcome: inflation. We recently completed our examination of the Cantillon effect, and you understand precisely what remaining in cash accomplishes to your wealth across time. The market represents a flawed, harsh, and unbalanced mechanism. However, it remains the sole mechanism engineered to dependably expand capital at a rate exceeding the central bank's currency creation. By maintaining your capital on the sidelines, you're ensuring it loses that competition. This represents the psychological penalty we accept for the fantasy of control. We believe we're reducing risk, but we're actually exchanging the minuscule, controllable risk of temporary market fluctuation for the certain long-term destruction of purchasing power. From a historical perspective, the market advances upward far more frequently than it declines. If you examine nearly 100 years of market performance data from the S&P 500 index, the market concludes the year at a higher value approximately 3 years out of every 4-year period. When you select DCA across a 12-month time frame, you're making a strategic wager that the market will experience a crash in the immediate near term, a wager that historical data demonstrates is incorrect 70% of the time. This isn't emotional reasoning. This is unambiguous, cold, mathematical reality anchored in the persistent upward trajectory of the global economy. Consider it from this perspective. Your capital's most powerful attribute is time spent in the market. It serves as the mechanism that powers compounding, which we recognize as the nearest phenomenon to magic within finance. When you opt for DCA, you're deliberately removing your capital from that powerful attribute for 12 months or longer. You're compelling the bulk of your wealth to remain on the sidelines while the market advances without you. If the market experiences growth during those 12 months, which typically occurs, you've sacrificed compounding all those potential gains on the $90,000 you maintained in cash. The market doesn't pause for your comfort threshold. It compensates participation. The genuine risk is not committing funds before a crash occurs. The genuine risk is the opportunity cost represented by the 70% of occasions the market advanced upward while you remained waiting. This constitutes the safety illusion. You shielded yourself from a minor short-term pain, but you guaranteed yourself a long-term mathematical handicap. Now let's confront the singular scenario where DCA genuinely excels, the major crash. Absolutely correct. If you commit $100,000 today and the market immediately plunges 30% tomorrow, you'll feel terrible feelings, and DCA would have softened that impact. This represents the 30% risk that immobilizes us all. This represents the fear that DCA effectively addresses. However, you must expand your perspective and examine the long-term result. In those uncommon periods where LSI underperforms DCA in the first year, research demonstrates a compelling pattern. The lump sum investment has frequently already recovered its advantage by year 5. Why does this occur? Because the capital that was committed early, even though it decreased in value, acquired more shares in total. When the recovery inevitably begins, the lump sum investor possesses a substantially larger ownership stake in the market and profits more completely from the eventual rebound. Consider it similar to buying a large apartment complex immediately before a temporary local economic downturn. You acquired it at the peak, and for 12 months, your value has declined. The DCA investor only acquires a few small units throughout that period. But once the downturn ends and the rental rates return to normal, the individual who possesses the entire complex, the LSI investor, will produce exponentially greater wealth than the individual who only possesses a few dispersed units. The LSI portfolio is constructed to profit from a recovery far more effectively. The DCA investor exchanges long-term profit for short-term peace of mind. The answer to this predicament is not a universal rule, it is a disciplined approach. You must distinguish between capital intended for short-term utilization and capital intended for long-term compounding. First, you must understand your time horizon. If you know you'll need the capital in fewer than 5 years, neither LSI nor DCA is suitable. That capital belongs in cash, sheltered from market exposure. However, if the capital is allocated for a purpose 5, 10, or 20 years into the future, your complete perspective must transform. Your obligation to that capital is to position it immediately where the highest mathematical probabilities favor you, which is in the market. Second, if you obtain a massive windfall and the concept of an immediate lump sum generates debilitating anxiety, you should find middle ground but never weaken your position. The objective is not psychological perfectionism, it is mathematical advantage. Do not extend your investment timeline across 12 months. Instead, contemplate this as a middle ground strategy. Commit 50% of the capital immediately as a definitive lump sum. Utilize the remaining 50% and commit it throughout the next 2 to 3 months, liquidating the remainder of your cash reserve on a predetermined timetable. This still secures the bulk of the market's upward movement while accommodating your psychological requirement for caution by minimizing the total duration your capital remains sidelined. The most significant falsehood in personal finance is that a safe path to wealth exists. The market doesn't compensate safety, it compensates participation and discipline. It compensates those who understand that time represents their most precious resource. Every day you delay is a day the market has a 2/3 probability of moving away from your entry point. Stop accepting the cost for safety. Stop allowing your fear to remove your capital from its greatest advantage. If you possess capital that you know logically you won't need for the next decade, your obligation is to deploy it immediately and allow compounding to perform its function. Hit like if this video revealed a strategy you've consistently followed but never critically examined. Follow Mary for more methods to understand the system and build long-term wealth. I'll see you in the next one.